Now, the rest of the story. It was only a college production of a play called Bird in Hand, but one member of the cast was destined for worldwide recognition. He was a handsome young man of Irish extraction. He could cry on cue, and that's a most difficult thing for actors to do. In Bird in Hand, for example, he played the part of an elderly innkeeper, and in one particularly poignant scene, the innkeeper expresses his private anguish in soliloquy, in tears. If the scene is to be effective, the tears must be unrestrained and genuine. The young actor could do it. He could cry eyefuls of real tears on stage. His theatrical craftsmanship, as his love for the theater, seemed boundless. While still in college, he starred in a drama entitled The Trysting Place. He also directed the play, also had written the play. His drama coach and mentor, Dr. Albert Upton, was much impressed by the promising protege. There were only two conceivable objectives to such a talent, said Dr. Upton, Hollywood or Broadway. After college, however, the young actor joined the cast of a small community theater in California, and it was there that he met a lovely young actress, her ancestors also Irish. She had already appeared in several Hollywood movies, including The Great Ziegfeld and Small Town Girl. The world one day would come to know her name as well. But we're racing on ahead now. The little theater was producing a play by Alexander Woolcott called The Dark Tower. The handsome young actor chose the part of Barry Jones. The pretty young motion picture actress took the role of Daphne Martin. And it was during rehearsals for this production that the girl first realized a quirk. For some unknown reason, she could not sing on stage. In one scene, for example, the Barry Jones character is sitting at a piano playing the opening bars of Stormy Weather, and the Daphne Martin character is supposed to start humming the familiar song, finally actually singing the words to Stormy Weather. Well, the young actress could and did hum along, yet no matter how hard she tried, she simply could not sing the lyrics. It was a block of some sort, an idiosyncrasy. Even during the performance, she could only speak the words in the song. Well, this amused the actor playing Barry Jones. In fact, he found the young lady's frustration rather attractive. The first time he asked her for a date, however, she turned him down. And the second time, she laughed. The young man's response was, "Don't laugh. Someday I'm going to marry you." But the girl did laugh again. But 2 years later, they were married. June 21, 1940. Yes, you know them. Can't think of anybody who doesn't. But did I mention that the young lady abandoned show business and the young man went into politics? And in politics, he went all the way. Nothing more to the story, really. Just thought you'd like to know how the celebrated couple met. The playhouse romance of the lovely Hollywood actress who could not bring herself to sing on stage, and the handsome young playwright, director, actor who so loved the theater and whose talent was such that he could cry real tears on cue. Today you simply refer to them as Pat and Dick, the Nixons. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Richard Nixon is certainly a controversial historical figure. Most of us immediately think of scandal when we hear his name. Is that fair? Should one, albeit long and drawn-out, scandal define a person's life? Of course, I'm talking about the Watergate scandal. The Watergate scandal began on June the 17th, 1972, with a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters, which was located inside the Watergate office building in Washington, D.C. The burglars were planting wiretapping devices in the headquarters. The Watergate scandal investigation resulted in 69 indictments and 48 convictions. President Nixon and his administration resisted the investigation, but they were forced to turn over the recordings from the automatic tape recording machine from the Oval Office of the White House. They turned over those tapes on March 21, 1973. Investigators found that there was an 18.5-minute portion of the tape which had been erased. Nixon's personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, explained that she had accidentally erased the tape by pushing the wrong pedal on the tape player while answering the phone. The press did not believe her. In 2003, forensic analysis determined that there were at least 5 and as many as 9 segments in the Oval Office tapes which had been erased. On August 5, 1974, the White House released what has become known as the smoking gun tape. On the tape, which was recorded on June the 23rd, 1972, 6 days after the Watergate break-in, President Nixon had a meeting with H.R. Haldeman in the Oval Office. During that meeting, the President discussed ways to stop the FBI from continuing the investigation. The smoking gun tape destroyed Nixon's political career. Congress was preparing to impeach President Nixon. On August 8, 1974, President Nixon gave his final nationally televised address as president from the Oval Office.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
On the following morning, Richard Nixon officially resigned to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Kissinger noted the time he received the resignation and initialed it. The time that Kissinger noted on the resignation, 11:35 a.m., was the official legal time that Vice President Gerald Ford became president. Although Nixon had resigned, criminal prosecution was still possible and probable. Most people considered it inevitable. On September the 8th, 1974, exactly 1 month after Nixon's televised resignation, President Ford issued a full and unconditional pardon of Nixon, which gave him immunization for prosecution for any crimes he had committed or may have committed or taken part in as president. What a tangled web we weave. But let's look at Nixon before he became president. Richard was the second of 5 brothers born to Frank Nixon and Hannah Milhouse. Richard's middle name, Milhouse, came from Hannah's maiden name. As a child, Richard Nixon's family struggled financially. In 1922, the Nixons' ranch failed and the family were forced to move to Whittier, California to be closer to Richard's mother's relatives. In Whittier, Frank opened a combination grocery store and gas station in which the entire Nixon family worked just to survive. In 1930, Richard enrolled at Whittier College, where he pursued various interests including student government, which we would expect, football, and drama, as Mr. Harvey explained. Now, can you imagine for a second if Richard Nixon had followed the acting path? In an alternate history, he could have become a renowned, revered actor. Richard still had his duties to his family and continued working at the family store. After 4 years at Whittier College, Richard earned a scholarship to attend Duke University's School of Law. While there, he became the president of the Student Bar Association. He graduated in June of 1937, returned to Whittier, and joined the law firm Wingert and Bewley. On January 16, 1938, Richard met a school teacher named Thelma Catherine Pat Ryan at a rehearsal for a community play in which they were both acting, just as Mr. Harvey explained. On June 21, 1940, they were married in the Mission Inn in Riverside, California. The room they were married in was the presidential suite. See a pattern here? In January 1942, they moved to Washington, D.C., and Richard joined the Office of Price Administration. 6 months later, he accepted an appointment as a lieutenant junior grade in the U.S. Naval Reserve and entered the Naval Training School in Rhode Island in August of that same year. 2 months later, Richard began serving as aide to the executive officer at the Naval Reserve Aviation Base in Ottumwa, Iowa. He volunteered for sea duty and was assigned to the commander of the Air Force in the U.S. Pacific Fleet. In October 1943, Richard was promoted to lieutenant. For 10 years, he served with Fleet Air Wing 8 and at various military offices throughout the country. In 1953, he was promoted to the rank of commander in the Naval Reserve. He held that rank until he retired from the Naval Reserve in June of 1966. Now, why do I mention all of this? For his service, Richard was awarded a Letter of Commendation, the American Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. If we stopped right there, Richard Nixon would certainly be remembered for his military service. He would be probably considered a hero. But of course, Nixon did not stop there. Richard ran for Congress in 1946 and won by more than 15,000 votes. He was easily reelected in 1948. In 1950, he defeated Congresswoman Helen Gahagan Douglas and won the U.S. Senate seat by more than 500,000 votes. Nixon was a fierce, ruthless campaigner, as you would expect. Richard said Helen was too sympathetic to left-wing causes and said she was pink right down to her underwear. Boy, you couldn't get away with saying something like that today. In response, Helen called him Tricky Dick, and the name stuck. Tricky Dick became General Dwight Eisenhower's running mate in the 1952 presidential election. Eisenhower became president, Nixon became vice president. Nixon ran for president in 1960, but lost to John F. Kennedy by less than 120,000 votes, which is 0.2% of the popular vote. Wow. Following the defeat, the Nixons left Washington and returned to California. This is known as Nixon's wilderness years. Richard practiced law and wrote a best-selling memoir called Six Crises. He ran for governor of California, but lost to incumbent Edmund G. Pat Brown Sr. by nearly 300,000 votes. Following his second major political defeat, Richard Nixon thought his political career was over. He told reporters, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore because, gentlemen, this is my last press conference." But of course, it wasn't. In 1968, Richard sought the nomination of the Republican Party for president, and he eventually secured that nomination. With Governor Spiro Agnew of Maryland as his running mate, Richard Nixon campaigned hard. On Election Day, Richard Nixon received just over 500,000 more votes than Hubert Humphrey. Now that's only about 0.7%, but that was popular vote. In the Electoral College, Nixon beat Humphrey by 110 votes. Nixon received a total of 301 votes, to Humphrey's 191 votes and George Wallace's 46 votes. The next presidential election, held in 1972, was a blowout. Nixon received 520 electoral votes and George McGovern received just 17 electoral votes. The Watergate break-in happened 5 months before Election Day. But you see, Nixon had nothing to worry about. He would have won the election anyway. Once the public began learning the details behind the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon's political career crumbled until he finally resigned as president. He's the only president in history so far to resign. Now remember earlier I explained that Richard Nixon's parents had a ranch which failed? Today that same ranch is the site of the Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. I plan to visit there soon. Despite all of his successes during his lifetime, Richard Nixon will be remembered throughout the ages as a disgraced president because of his part in the Watergate scandal. Whether fair or unfair, that's just the way history is. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.